Imagine pulling a 1965 Washington quarter from an old drawer, a family coin jar, or an inherited collection, and suddenly hearing someone say that little quarter could be worth $10 million. $10 million for 25 cents. It sounds unbelievable, and in the world of rare coins, unbelievable claims spread fast. But today, we are going to separate the mystery from the facts. Welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy discovering rare American coins, hidden varieties, mint eras, and the real stories behind valuable US currency, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because this 1965 quarter has a fascinating secret. And here is the most important warning before we begin. A normal 1965 Washington quarter is not a $10 million coin. There is no reliable documented auction record showing a normal 1965 Washington quarter selling for $10 million. But that does not mean every 1965 quarter is worthless. In fact, some extraordinary 1965 quarters have sold for thousands of dollars, and certain rare varieties and eras can make this date much more interesting than an ordinary coin. So if you have one sitting at home, don't spend it just yet. Look closely. The tiny details could change everything. The 1965 Washington quarter was born during one of the most dramatic changes in American coinage history. For decades, Washington quarters were made from 90% silver and 10% copper, but America was facing a serious coin shortage, and rising silver prices were creating enormous pressure on the nation's circulating coinage. Then came the Coinage Act of 1965. President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the legislation on July 23, 1965, and American circulating quarters moved into the modern clad era. The 1965 Washington quarter became one of the first regular U.S. quarters made with the new copper-nickel clad composition. Instead of being 90% silver, the coin contains a pure copper core surrounded by layers made from 75% copper and 25% nickel. The coin weighs approximately 5.67 grams and measures about 24.3 millimeters across, with a reeded edge. And there is another detail that makes 1965 especially interesting. Look at the area where a mint mark would normally appear. There isn't one. But don't automatically assume that means the coin was struck only at Philadelphia. During this period, the United States Mint suspended mint marks. Philadelphia and Denver were producing regular circulation coins, while the San Francisco Assay Office also struck special 1965 special mint set quarters. That means a 1965 quarter without a mint mark can have several different production stories behind it. The famous Washington portrait on the obverse was designed by John Flanagan. Washington faces left, with liberty above him, in God we trust on either side, and the date 1965 below. Turn the coin over, and you'll see the American eagle with its wings spread, surrounded by United States of America, EPLURBUS UNUM, and quarter dollar. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary quarter. And that's exactly what makes this story so interesting. The Philadelphia Mint produced approximately 1.82 billion regular 1965 Washington quarters. That is an enormous number. So the vast majority of 1965 quarters are common. If you find a worn 1965 quarter that has spent decades circulating through cash registers, vending machines, pockets, and coin jars, you should not expect a fortune. But now comes the part collectors pay attention to. Condition. A coin that is common in worn condition can become much more interesting when it survives in extraordinary mint state condition. Think about what happened in 1965. People were not necessarily treating these coins as future collectibles. They were spending them. They went into grocery stores, parking meters, banks, restaurants, and cash registers. Every transaction created another opportunity for scratches, dents, discoloration, and contact marks. So finding a 1965 quarter with unusually clean surfaces, strong luster, sharp details, and virtually no distracting marks can be much more difficult than finding an ordinary circulated example. And this is where grading becomes extremely important. Professional grading services use numerical grades to describe a coin's condition. An MS-60 coin is uncirculated, but it can still have significant marks or weaknesses. As the grade rises, the standards become increasingly demanding. MS-65 is a much more desirable gem-quality coin. MS-66 is better still. And once you reach the highest grades, tiny differences can produce enormous differences in collector demand and price. PCGS records show that a 1965 Washington quarter graded MS-67 sold for $705 at Heritage Auctions in January 2015. Other exceptionally high-grade examples have brought more than $1,000, while PCGS's current price guide data shows dramatically higher levels for the finest grades, including a listed MS-68 level far above ordinary collector examples. And here is something even more surprising. PCGS records an auction result of $12,650 for a 1965 Washington quarter described as a Gem BU example, sold by Stax in January 2005. But don't misunderstand that number. It does not mean every 1965 quarter is worth $12,650. It means a particular exceptional coin achieved that price under specific auction circumstances. That distinction is absolutely critical. Now let's go deeper. Because the 1965 quarter has documented varieties that collectors actively search for. One of the most interesting is the 1965 double die obverse. Look closely at Liberty. Then examine In God We Trust. And study the date. On the recognized FS101 variety, doubling can be visible on many of the letters, the date, and portions of Washington's profile. This is not simply a coin that looks blurry because of damage. True double dies result from a die-making error, and specialists examine the shape and location of the doubling to determine whether a coin represents a recognized variety. PCGS identifies multiple 1965 double die varieties, including DDO FS101, DDO FS102, and a double die reverse variety. The FS101 example is particularly interesting because PCGS describes it as a very rare and popular variety. One documented auction result for the FS101 variety reached $489 for an AU58 example. Again, that is a completely different situation from a normal circulated 1965 quarter. And there is another possibility that can be even more exciting. The wrong planchet. Remember, 1965 was the transition year from silver to clad coinage. That transition created opportunities for unusual errors. PCGS records a 1965 Washington quarter struck on a silver planchet. That coin, graded XF45, sold for $4,025 at Heritage Auctions in 2003. Now imagine finding something like that in an old family collection. At first, it might simply look like a 1965 quarter. But the metal composition, weight, appearance, and professional authentication could reveal that it is something completely different from the billions of ordinary clad quarters. And this is why you should never judge a potentially rare coin simply by looking at a photograph online. A genuine error needs to be examined carefully. Weight matters. Diameter matters. Edge appearance matters. Metal composition matters. And authentication matters. If somebody tells you your 1965 quarter is worth $10 million, don't immediately believe them. Ask a much better question. What exactly makes this particular coin worth that amount? Is it a recognized double die? Is it struck on the wrong planchet? Is it an extraordinary mint state specimen? Is there documented provenance? Is there a genuine auction record? Has a respected grading service authenticated it? Those questions separate serious numismatics from internet hype. So what should you do if you find a 1965 quarter at home? First, don't clean it. This is extremely important. Scrubbing, polishing, chemicals, or abrasive materials can permanently damage a coin and destroy collectible value. Second, examine the date. Confirm that it really says 1965. Third, look for the absence of a mint mark, but remember that this is normal for 1965 and does not automatically indicate rarity. Fourth, inspect Liberty, In God We Trust, and the date for genuine double die characteristics. Fifth, examine the reverse carefully. Look for unusual doubling, die cracks, missing details, abnormal lettering, or other features that appear to be part of the strike rather than damage. Sixth, consider the condition. Is the coin heavily circulated? Or does it still have original mint luster and remarkably clean surfaces? And finally, if you believe you have an important error or an exceptionally high-grade example, consider professional authentication. Because a $10 million claim requires extraordinary evidence. So let's return to the headline. Can a 1965 Washington quarter really be worth $10 million? Based on reliable documented auction information, there is no evidence that a normal 1965 Washington quarter is a $10 million coin. The documented numbers are dramatically lower. Ordinary circulated examples can be worth little more than face value or modest collector premiums, depending on condition and market demand. Nice uncirculated examples can bring substantially more. Exceptional high-grade pieces have reached hundreds or thousands of dollars. A documented 1965 silver-planchet error sold for $4,025. And an exceptional 1965 example recorded by PCGS reached $12,650. That is already a remarkable jump from 25 cents. But it is still nowhere near $10 million. And that is actually what makes this coin more fascinating, not less. Because the real treasure is not a fake promise of instant wealth. The real treasure is understanding what you're holding. A coin produced during America's transition away from circulating silver. A coin struck during a nationwide coin shortage. A coin without a mint mark that can have a surprisingly complicated production history. A coin with recognized double die varieties. A coin with documented wrong planchet errors. And a coin whose finest surviving examples can be dramatically more valuable than ordinary pieces. So tonight, go through that old jar. Check the drawer. Look inside the inherited coin album. Search the old box in the attic. Maybe you'll find nothing more than a worn quarter. But maybe you'll discover a beautifully preserved 1965 example, or a strange-looking coin that deserves a closer examination. And remember the golden rule of coin collecting. The date alone does not make a coin rare. The mint production, variety, era, condition, rarity, demand, and authentication all matter. A quarter is still a quarter until something extraordinary happened to it. If you enjoyed this investigation, subscribe to the channel for more rare US coin discoveries, historical mysteries, valuable varieties, and genuine auction records. And tell me in the comments, do you have a 1965 Washington quarter in your collection? Does yours look circulated, brilliant uncirculated, doubled, unusually colored, or completely different from the others? And which old US coin should we investigate next? Because somewhere in America, another ordinary-looking coin may be waiting for someone to look closely. And sometimes, that tiny detail really can change everything. Imagine finding an old 1983 D Washington quarter in a forgotten drawer, an inherited coin collection, or a dusty jar, and someone tells you it could be worth $50 million. Would you believe it? Before you spend that quarter, look closely. Because while a normal 1983 D quarter is absolutely not a $50 million coin, this date has a fascinating story, and some exceptionally preserved examples have brought surprisingly strong prices. Welcome back to the channel. If you love rare American coins, hidden minting mistakes, valuable varieties, and the history behind the coins hiding in everyday collections, subscribe and turn on notifications. Today, we're investigating the 1983 D Washington quarter and separating the real opportunities from the internet hype. The first thing you need to know is simple. There is no reliable documented auction record showing an ordinary 1983 D Washington quarter selling for $50 million. In fact, the documented record is dramatically lower. But that doesn't make the coin boring. Quite the opposite. The 1983 D quarter can become valuable when exceptional condition, rarity, or an unusual minting error enters the picture. Let's go back to 1983. The United States was still using the modern Washington quarter design that had begun decades earlier. The obverse features George Washington facing left, with liberty above his head, in God we trust on either side, and the date below. The reverse shows the American eagle with its wings spread, surrounded by United States of America, EPLUIBUS UNUM, and quarter dollar. The original design was created by sculptor John Flanagan, whose Washington portrait became one of the most recognizable designs in American coinage. The 1983 D was struck at the Denver Mint, which is identified by the small d mint mark on the obverse. And here's another important fact. This is a modern clad quarter, not a silver quarter. The 1983 D Washington quarter weighs approximately 5.67 grams, measures about 24.3 millimeters, and has a reeded edge. Its outer layers are 75% copper and 25% nickel over a pure copper center. The Denver Mint produced approximately 617.8 million 1983 D Washington quarters. That's an enormous mintage. So why would collectors care? Because the surprising part isn't how many were produced. It's how few survived in truly exceptional condition. Most 1983 D quarters entered circulation. They were handled by millions of Americans. They traveled through cash registers, vending machines, pockets, banks, restaurants, parking meters, and coin jars. Every trip created another opportunity for scratches, contact marks, dull surfaces, and wear. And that's where the story changes. Imagine two 1983 D quarters sitting next to each other. Both were struck at Denver. Both have the same date. Both have the D mint mark. Both have the same basic design. But one has spent 40 years circulating. The other was carefully preserved in nearly perfect condition. To an ordinary person, they're both 25-cent coins. To a collector, they can be completely different. PCGS identifies the 1983 D as a common issue in circulated grades, but notes that MS-67 examples are scarce, with fewer than 2 dozen known according to its cited condition census information. Now look at the grade. MS stands for mint state, meaning the coin shows no evidence of normal circulation. As the grade rises, the standards become much more demanding. An MS-63 coin can still have noticeable contact marks. An MS-65 coin can be attractive and sharply struck. An MS-66 example is significantly more difficult, and an MS-67 specimen is where the competition becomes much more serious. This is why you should never judge a coin's value simply by looking at its date. Condition can completely change the equation. Now comes the question everyone wants answered. What could a 1983 D quarter actually be worth? An ordinary circulated example generally isn't a life-changing treasure. In many cases, it is simply worth its face value or a modest premium depending on condition and the market. Even some certified mint state examples sell for relatively modest amounts. PCGS auction records, for example, show an MS-65 1983D selling for only $14 in a 2004 David Lawrence auction, and another MS-65 example selling for $15 in a 2014 Great Collections auction. But now watch what happens as the grade climbs. A PCGS MS-67 example sold for $1,057.50 at Heritage Auctions in June 2014. Another MS-67 example appeared at Heritage in 2018 and brought $1,320. And PCGS lists an auction record of $1,410 for an MS-67 1983D Washington quarter, sold by Heritage Auctions on September 7, 2016. That's a spectacular difference from 25 cents. But notice something important. We are talking about approximately $1,000, not $50 million. And that distinction matters. A coin doesn't become valuable because somebody puts a huge number in a YouTube title. It becomes valuable because collectors can verify exactly why that particular specimen is rare or desirable. So what should you look for? First, confirm the date, 1983. Then find the D mint mark on the obverse. Next, examine the entire coin under good lighting. Look for original mint luster. Look for clean surfaces. Look for sharp details. And most importantly, don't mistake ordinary damage for a valuable mint error. A scratch across Washington's face isn't automatically an error. A dent isn't automatically an error. A flattened letter caused by circulation isn't automatically a double die. And discoloration doesn't automatically mean the coin contains valuable metal. Real varieties and errors need proper identification. If you discover unusual doubling, an off-center strike, a wrong planchet, a major die break, or another dramatic minting abnormality, that's when professional evaluation becomes especially important. And here's another mistake collectors make. They claim the coin. Don't. If you discover an old 1983 D quarter that looks unusually beautiful, leave it alone. Don't polish it. Don't scrub it. Don't use chemicals. Cleaning can permanently damage the original surface and may reduce the coin's collectible value. Instead, handle it carefully by the edges and consider having an important specimen professionally authenticated and graded. Now imagine this scenario. You open an old family album. Inside is a group of ordinary-looking quarters saved decades ago. Most are circulated, but one 1983 D looks almost untouched. You turn it under the light. The surfaces shine. Washington's portrait is sharp. The eagle on the reverse has strong detail. There are very few contact marks. Suddenly, the coin that looked like 25 cents deserves a much closer examination. That's the hidden treasure angle of coin collecting. Not every discovery becomes a fortune, but sometimes an overlooked coin can turn out to be much more interesting than its face value suggests. And that is the real lesson of the 1983 D. Washington quarter. The date alone doesn't make it rare. The D mint mark alone doesn't make it rare. And a claim of $50 million doesn't make it valuable. What matters is the evidence. Rarity, condition, mint errors, recognized varieties, collector demand, authentication, and documented market results. So let's return to that unbelievable $50 million claim. Could your ordinary 1983 D quarter be worth $50 million? Based on reliable documented auction information, there is no evidence supporting a $50 million valuation for a normal 1983 D Washington quarter. The documented auction record cited by PCGS is around $1,410 for an MS-67 example. That's still an incredible premium, over 25 cents, but it is nowhere close to $50 million. And that's exactly why responsible coin collecting matters. Don't throw away an old coin because someone says it's worthless. But don't believe every outrageous price claim either. Investigate. Compare. Weigh the coin when appropriate. Study the surfaces. Check the mint mark. Learn the recognized varieties. And when something truly unusual appears, get professional authentication. Because somewhere in America, a 1983 D quarter may still be sitting in an old coin jar, a forgotten drawer, an inherited collection, or an attic box. Most will be ordinary. Some will be beautiful. A few may be exceptional. And the rarest examples can be worth dramatically more than face value. So check your change. Check those old collections. And remember, the difference between an ordinary quarter and a valuable quarter isn't always the year. Sometimes it's the tiny detail hiding in plain sight. If you enjoyed this investigation, subscribe to the channel for more rare US coin discoveries, authentic auction records, mint errors, and American coin history. And tell me in the comments, do you have a 1983 D Washington quarter in your collection? What condition is it in? And which old US coin should we investigate next? Because the next valuable coin might not be sitting in a museum. It might be sitting in your house. Imagine finding a 1987 P Washington quarter in an old family collection, and then seeing a headline claiming that this tiny 25-cent coin could be worth $30 trillion. $30 trillion. That would be more money than almost anyone could imagine. But before you start searching every coin jar in your house, there's something you need to know. There is no credible evidence that a normal 1987 P Washington quarter is worth $30 trillion. So why is this coin still worth investigating? Because the truth is much more fascinating than the headline. Welcome back to the channel. If you love rare US coins, hidden minting errors, valuable varieties, American coin history, and the possibility of discovering something unusual in an old collection, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Today, we're taking a close look at the 1987 P Washington quarter, what it is, how many were made, what collectors actually look for, and how much the rarest documented examples have really brought. And trust me, you will want to look closely at this coin. The 1987 P Washington quarter was struck at the Philadelphia Mint. The P mint mark identifies Philadelphia, and you'll find it on the obverse beneath Washington's portrait. The coin carries the classic Washington design created by sculptor John Flanagan. On the front, George Washington faces left. The inscriptions include Liberty, In God We Trust, and the date 1987. Turn it over, and you'll see the American bald eagle with its wings spread, surrounded by United States of America, EPLUIBUS UNUM, and quarter dollar. The 1987 P is part of the modern clad Washington quarter series. It weighs approximately 5.67 grams, measures about 24.3 millimeters, and has a reeded edge. Its composition is 75% copper and 25% nickel over a pure copper center. And here's the first important surprise. The Philadelphia Mint struck approximately 582,499,481 examples of the 1987 P quarter. That's more than 500 million coins. So clearly, the ordinary 1987 P quarter is not an ultra-rare coin. Most examples that spent years circulating are worth little more than face value, although particularly attractive or collectible specimens can command premiums. But coin collecting has a fascinating rule. A large mintage doesn't mean every surviving example is equally common. Imagine two 1987 P quarters. One spent decades traveling through pockets, cash registers, vending machines, and coin jars. It has scratches, the high points of Washington's portrait show wear. The reverse has contact marks. The original mint luster is mostly gone. Now imagine another 1987 P quarter that was placed into an album shortly after it was produced and barely touched for decades. The surfaces are bright. The luster is strong. The details are sharp. There are very few distracting marks. To the average person, both coins are simply quarters. To a serious collector, they can be completely different coins. And that's where grading becomes important. A professional grading service evaluates a coin's condition on a standardized scale. Coins graded MS60 through MS70 are considered mint state. But reaching the highest grades is extremely difficult. Tiny marks that are invisible to a casual observer can prevent a coin from receiving a top grade. And when very few examples reach the finest grades, collectors can compete aggressively for them. That's exactly what happened with some 1987 P quarters. According to PCGS auction records, a 1987 P Washington quarter graded MS67 brought $689.98 in a 2018 eBay transaction recorded by PCGS. Now stop and think about that. The coin has a face value of 25 cents, but an exceptionally high-grade example brought nearly $700. That's an enormous difference, and it demonstrates why you shouldn't judge a coin solely by its denomination. But there's an important warning. That auction result does not mean every 1987 P quarter is worth hundreds of dollars. It applies to a particular certified coin in a particular grade, sold under particular market conditions. The ordinary circulated example is an entirely different story. Now let's talk about what you should actually look for. First, confirm the date. Make sure the coin really says 1987. Second, look for the P mint mark beneath Washington. Third, inspect the surfaces. If the coin is heavily worn, scratched, or damaged, it is unlikely to be a major condition rarity. But if the coin appears almost untouched, slow down. Look closely. Examine Washington's cheek, jaw, hair, and the fields around the portrait. Then turn the coin over. Study the eagle, lettering, and open fields. You're looking for unusual features that appear to have been created during the minting process, not damage that happened afterward. And this distinction is critical. A scratch is not automatically a mint error. A dent is not automatically a rare variety. A strange color does not automatically mean the coin is valuable. And doubling caused by damage or mechanical wear is not necessarily a genuine doubled die. Collectors need to distinguish genuine varieties and mint errors from post-mint damage. If you believe your coin has a major error, professional examination and authentication can make a huge difference. And here's another rule that every new collector should remember. Never clean a potentially valuable coin. Don't polish it. Don't scrub it. Don't use household chemicals. Don't try to make it shine. Original surfaces are part of a coin's history, and cleaning can permanently damage those surfaces. Now imagine finding one in an old drawer. Maybe it came from a parent's collection. Maybe it was stored in a cardboard album. Maybe it was sitting inside a bankroll collection. Maybe you found it in a box of coins inherited from a relative. Most likely, it will simply be an ordinary 1987p quarter. And that's okay. Coin collecting isn't about believing every coin is a jackpot. It's about learning how to recognize the unusual ones. And the 1987p has one particularly valuable lesson. The surprising part is that not every coin from a specific year is valuable. The date gets you into the investigation. The condition, variety, error, rarity, and authentication determine whether the investigation becomes exciting. So now comes the question everyone wants answered. What is a 1987p Washington quarter actually worth? For an ordinary circulated example, generally not much more than face value. For a nice uncirculated example, the value can rise depending on grade and market demand. For an exceptionally high-grade certified specimen, documented auction results show values reaching hundreds of dollars, with the PCGS recorded MS67 example bringing $689.98. That's the real, documented story. Not $30 trillion. Not an automatic fortune. And certainly not a guaranteed life-changing discovery. But potentially a very interesting coin. So where did the $30 trillion claim come from? There is no reliable auction evidence supporting that number for a normal 1987p Washington quarter. In fact, $30 trillion would be an extraordinary valuation far outside the documented market for this coin. Responsible collectors should always ask for evidence before believing a huge price claim. Where was the coin sold? When was it sold? What grade was it? Which grading service authenticated it? What error or variety made it rare? And can the auction record be independently verified? If those questions can't be answered, treat the claim as entertainment, not established numismatic fact. And that's the difference between viral coin content and real coin collecting. Real numismatics is about evidence. It's about history. It's about condition. It's about rarity. It's about varieties and errors. And it's about understanding why one coin can sell for face value while another example from the exact same year can bring hundreds, or potentially more, when an extraordinary and authenticated rarity is involved. So tonight, check your old coins. Look through that drawer. Open that family album. Search the inherited collection. Maybe you'll find an ordinary 1987p quarter. But if you find one that looks dramatically different, unusually well preserved, or shows a legitimate minting anomaly, don't dismiss it. Don't clean it. Don't spend it. Take a closer look. Because the real mystery isn't whether every 1987p quarter is worth $30 trillion. It isn't. The real mystery is whether your particular coin has something unusual that most examples don't have. And that is what makes coin collecting so exciting. A tiny piece of metal can carry decades of American history, and sometimes a tiny detail can completely change its collector value. If you enjoyed this investigation, subscribe to the channel for more rare US coins, genuine auction records, mint errors, valuable varieties, and American coin history. And tell me in the comments, do you have a 1987p Washington quarter? Is yours circulated, uncirculated, or professionally graded? And what old US coin should we investigate next? Because you never know what might be hiding in the next coin jar. Check closely, know the facts, and never confuse a sensational price claim with a verified coin value.